Hello again. For those of us over a certain age, the name of Tulsa brings to mind the song written by Burt Bacharach, 24 Hours from Tulsa, sung by Gene Pitney. Though it never rose higher than number 5 in the hit parade in Britain when it was released in 1963, it did help to establish Gene Pitney as an international star. A little over 40 years before the record was released, a dreadful event, or series of events I should more properly say, took place in Tulsa, which lay hidden from history for many years. However, we've now gone from one extreme to another, from complete amnesia to hysterical exaggeration of the scale of what happened on May the 31st, 1921. If you Google Tulsa Race Massacre, you will soon come up with websites which claim that hundreds of people were killed in the city and that the area where black people lived was attacked and bombed from the air. This is not true, of course, but I'll come to that shortly. On May the 30th, 1921, a black teenager called Dick Rowland entered a lift in an office building in the Oklahoma city of Tulsa. The lift was being operated by a 17-year-old white girl, and he either trod on her foot or stumbled and touched her arm or something of that sort, but whatever happened, she started screaming and Rowland ran off. He was arrested the following day, by which time there were rumours that the girl had been sexually assaulted. This was a dangerous situation in those days, and the police were worried that a lynch mob might gather. A large group of black men also thought this might happen, and so they armed themselves with rifles and pistols and made their way towards the police station. This was perhaps not the best move to make, and certainly one more likely to inflame the situation than otherwise. As it was, the police had things under control and there was no chance of the youth being handed over to a lynch mob. However, a number of white men took exception to the sight of a large group, perhaps 75 or 100 black men, carrying guns in their part of town. As in many American cities at that time, Tulsa was segregated along racial lines, with black people in one part and white people in another. The sight of 75 to 100 black men, all armed, appearing in a white district was enough to cause serious consequences. Some white men went to fetch their own guns and shooting broke out. In the gun battle which followed, the black men had the better of it and they managed to shoot dead 10 white people for the loss of only 2 of their own side. This suggests strongly that there were a lot more black men with guns during that encounter than there were white. Things escalated rapidly, with a large crowd of white people infuriated at the death of 10 of their own people. They went off in search of guns themselves and then rampaged through the black district, setting fire to some buildings. There are 2 things to consider here. The first is that it only takes 1 or 2 buildings to catch fire in a city and be left to blaze without anybody putting them out for a large fire to develop which is going to burn down whole streets. Chicago was famously burned to the ground after a cow allegedly kicked over an oil lamp. The story may be apocryphal, but it's certain that a small fire in 1871 soon grew to be a big one, which practically destroyed the city. We remember too the Great Fire of London, in which the same thing happened. A small fire got out of control and destroyed most of the city. This is probably what happened in Tulsa, with the fire brigade being unable to reach burning buildings, either because of the crowds or because they were deliberately intimidated and walled off by angry whites. The second thing to mention is the stories that this destruction was caused by white people in aeroplanes dropping bombs or flaming missiles from the air, which is a story which circulated after the event and has been exaggerated over years. There was no evidence at all for this happening. It was just one of those mad rumours. A moment's thought will show you how ridiculous the idea is. In 1921, the light aircraft, which is what these were, had open cockpits. I don't know if any viewers have ever flown in an aeroplane with an open cockpit. I have in a Tiger Moth, and I can say with absolute certainty that you could not strike a match or light anything under those circumstances. It's simply far too windy. You can't even hear yourself speak. As for the idea that anybody would be fooling around with petrol bombs or pieces of cloth soaked in turpentine, which I've heard, it's absolutely nuts. The biplanes had wooden frames with canvas stretched over them, which had been varnished to make them waterproof. Those things went up like torches if anything burning touched them. It would be suicidal to start playing with matches and petrol in a biplane flying along. In fact, the aeroplanes had been chartered by the police to see what was going on from above, just as we see the police now using helicopters to keep track of riots and demonstrations. There was certainly a lot of damage to property during the Tulsa race massacre, but not a very great loss of life. In 2001, a thorough investigation of all the available records showed that just 36 people had actually died. That means after the 10 white people had been killed and 2 black people in the initial fight, another 24 black people were killed in revenge. As for Dick Rowland, the boy whose arrest sparked all the trouble, the police released him because it was obvious that he hadn't actually done anything other than accidentally brush against a white girl. He left Tulsa as soon as he was released and never returned. I thought it worth talking about this because with the 100th anniversary of the events in Tulsa coming up on May the 31st, there will be a lot of exaggerated accounts floating about, and it might be good to remind ourselves of the facts.